How are you guys doing? I'm Caroline Allen, and I am a mineral geek. I'm also the co-founder and CEO of Beam Minerals. We provide plant-based humic and fulvic mineral supplements. I got into this whole conversation of GMO and glyphosate because I was trying to determine what was wrong with me, and I had started taking these plant-based minerals, and they'd had a huge effect. And I started learning about where they come from, and that took me into a whole area of soil science and production farming. And then I started learning about glyphosate and GMO. And I had so many huge ahas. I thought people really need to know about this, and I was totally ignorant. So I'm going to take you through this presentation, and hopefully it will be helpful to you. What I want to start with is, what is GMO? You know, when I started out on this journey, I thought I knew what GMO meant. I thought it meant making a bigger strawberry, but it actually has a lot more meaning that's really important to know about. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the GMO glyphosate connection. A lot of people are just going, oh, no GMO, no GMO. But actually, it's not the GMO that's the issue. It's the glyphosate. The next we're going to talk about is what you really need to know about glyphosate to protect your health, and how it works in the body, what are the health correlations, and that kind of thing. And then ultimately, how you can remediate glyphosate from your system using humic substances, fulvic and humic substances that are plant-based minerals. So let's jump into it. I'm going to try and go through this pretty quickly. There's some deeper information in my presentation. I'm not going to go deep into every piece of it. You can, if you want to geek out with me, feel free to ask questions or come down to the booth and we'll geek out deeper. I'm going to kind of skirt across the top and give you what I'm going to call the cliff notes so that you can really be empowered with your own health. So what does GMO mean? Of course, we know it means genetically modified organism, but the fact is it doesn't only mean just making a bigger strawberry. But GMO is not the real issue. We've been genetically modifying foods for thousands of years. Here's a picture of a banana and what it used to look like as a wild banana, and now the banana that, of course, none of us keto people eat, but we see in the store. The fact is that these GMO products have been being modified using selective breeding for years and years. And they're not inherently dangerous just selective breeding is not an inherently dangerous issue. The problem is the glyphosate. And we're going to talk about what glyphosate is and how it got into our foods. So first of all, how many of you, and tell the truth, have in your garage one of these containers that says Roundup, and you use it for killing the weeds in your maybe some blackberries, or maybe you kill the weeds in your driveway, or maybe your neighbor uses it to remove the big thing of blackberries that always keep coming back, right? So how in the world did this weed killer that we use for these kinds of things get in our food? Now, what I always really want to tell people is no one said, oh, it would be a great idea to put this weed killer on our food. No one tried to kill humans. There aren't these terrible, horrible people who were trying to do something really bad. They were actually trying to solve a problem. So the problem was they wanted to increase yields, and farmers struggle with crop yields. So what they're doing is they're trying to figure out a way to get rid of the weeds so that they can easily harvest their food, the food they're growing, without dealing with all the weed problems. The problem is that they solved that issue and they created other problems. So how they did it was that they created genetically modified seeds, and these seeds would be able to grow, and then they could spray this weed killer Roundup on the crops, directly on the crops, and the crops would live and the weeds would die. What a great idea. Really a great idea. And so actually the Roundup that you have in your container at home, if you have that, is the actual stuff that's sprayed on the food that you eat with GMO foods that you buy in the grocery store. And the problem is that the stuff that you have in your garage has a certain power and strength. The ones that they spray on the crops is actually stronger because it's mixed with something called adjuvants and surfactants, which it's like soap, and it makes it stick to the plant more easily, and it also makes it more bioavailable in your body. So this is a field, really interesting to see. So these are genetically modified corn that grows up, and then they went through, you saw the sprayer spraying the field, and all the weeds died, and you see the corn is completely alive. Isn't that great for the farmer? They're like, cool, no problem. We don't have to worry about all those weeds getting in the corn. So, of course, the problem is that not only are they killing all the weeds, they're also killing all the microorganisms that are in the soil, and they're also carrying the crops that you end up eating are carrying the glyphosate. Now, a lot of us are carnivore or eating meat. We're not eating grains, so we're like, oh, we don't have this problem. But guess what? You do. If you are not eating meat that is grass-finished, not grain-finished, you are getting glyphosate. And especially if you're eating organ meats. If you're doing any kind of eating organ meats or eating supplements that are made of organ meats, you have to ask if they are grass-finished. They need to be grass-finished to minimize your glyphosate exposure. You're still getting glyphosate because you cannot, if you buy food at the grocery store, you are getting glyphosate. If you drink water from a tap, you cannot get away from it. And we'll get into that. So the other problem with the production farming and the way they're using glyphosate is when they spray that on the fields, now it rains or they irrigate and the water comes off and that glyphosate ends up in our water table. It also blows across, and they call it drift, and it ends up in the air, so we're breathing it. You cannot get away from glyphosate exposure. So now let's talk about how it actually works. And this is a really interesting thing. So when you eat glyphosate in some food and it gets into your gut, I call it the Trojan horse method. And glyphosate, the GLY part, is part of the molecule, and it mimics a very important amino acid in your body called glycine. And glycine is one of the most utilized amino acids in your body. And so your body goes, oh yeah, that looks like glycine, let's take it in, okay? And glycine has some specific uses in your body like collagen production, hemoglobin production, blood sugar regulation, a whole host, there's many more. So when you're bringing in glyphosate, instead of glycine, you're actually affecting these aspects of your health. There's a lot I could go into here, and I'm just, again, skimming across the top. There's a lot to really know about that. So what does the glyphosate do when it gets in your gut? And what it does is it inhibits something called the shikimate pathway. Now, when they first developed glyphosate, they said, well, this shikimate pathway only exists in plants. So we don't have to worry about humans ingesting glyphosate because they're mammals. They're a totally different kind of organism. And what this glyphosate does is it inhibits this shikimate pathway, which is a 7-step set of metabolic processes that metabolize specific amino acids that you absolutely have to have for specific functions in your body. So when you have glyphosate in your system, what happens is it inhibits the production of these specific amino acids. It does some other things that we're going to get into, but those things create all sorts of electrical issues. They create non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. They are correlated with autism, a whole host of physical issues, which we'll skirt across the top of And there are many studies. There's actually, I think it's like 10,000. I mean, it's a huge, huge number of court cases that are being filed against the company who owns this technology for things like non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, different clearly health correlated issues. And they're losing. They asked the government to, they said, well, look, we'll pay $10 billion to file all court cases and no one can ever file a case against us again. And that's what's happened. They're in the process of that right now. Okay. So what is the connection between weeds in your gut? Well, guess what? Your gut is filled with beneficial beneficial fungi, algae, protozoa, and bacteria. This is what we call the gut microbiome, right? So the sad thing is what they didn't realize when they were creating this glyphosate, that it was going to completely destroy the gut microbiome and create what we call gut dysbiosis or leaky gut. And how does that happen? There's a set of enzymes in your gut, and they're called CP450. And these enzymes, they call it the first line of defense. And the lining of your gut, actually, they're cells, and these cells are actually touching. So you can see on the right side of your picture there, you see these cells, they're actually touching, and they're creating a wall so that things like environmental toxins, food particles that haven't been digested, et cetera, cannot get into your bloodstream. What happens when you get these CP450 enzymes inhibited is these spaces open up. And when you do that, then you get all sorts of environmental toxins, you get more glyphosate absorbed into your bloodstream, all sorts of things like that. And it creates a host of issues. The interesting thing to note is that this is the same set of enzymes associated with celiacs and gluten intolerance. So why have we had a huge rise in gluten intolerance? Well, partly because the grains that are sprayed with glyphosate, number one, and number two, because the glyphosate, when it gets in your body, is inhibiting these enzymes in your gut. I know I've said a lot. I hope how are we doing so far? Everything's pretty clear? Okay. Yes, and this is one of there's a book, it's called Toxic Legacy. It's by a really smart scientist named Stephanie Seneff. And one of the things that they're actually correlating is that they believe that autism, the rise of autism, is actually about fetal exposure to glyphosate. For the mother was exposed to glyphosate and it's affected the fetus, and that's causing the rise in autism. And she has all the science behind it. There's studies. You can go and look and read about it. It's really interesting. So the other thing that glyphosate does is it exacerbates mineral depletion, which is one of the reasons I got into this whole world of glyphosate, because I was dealing with mineral depletion, and I was like, well, okay, our foods are depleted of minerals. Well, why is that? Well, one of the reasons is when they spray the glyphosate on the foods that you eat, and it's not just grains now, they're using it for all sorts of things, lettuce, vegetables, all sorts of things. One of the ways that it kills the weeds is it chelates out important minerals like copper, molybdenum, and iron. And these are very, very important minerals for specific growth functions. So when it kills the plant, when it sucks those minerals out, that's one of the things that kills the plant. And that's also what happens in your system, is that glyphosate gets in your system and it starts chelating these minerals out, okay? And of course, we all deal with different types of mineral depletion. We're also drinking water That is devoid of minerals. Of bottled water, filtered water, that also has very little minerals. It has little or no minerals in it, so we're already dealing with depletion, and now you add glyphosate, which sucks the minerals out. Brita, no, it does not. Yeah, I'm so sorry. It's actually very hard to get glyphosate completely out of water. So even with reverse osmosis, you can still end up with some glyphosate in the water. Sometimes I've understood that if you reverse osmosis and then distill the water, you can get to a very, very near to zero. But it really depends on what level is in the water that you have. We're going to talk a little bit about testing so you could find out how much glyphosate is in the water or foods that you're eating. So the other piece of glyphosate toxicity or exposure that's really important is that it affects the pineal gland. And the pineal gland in your body is where melatonin is produced and also serotonin is synthesized. So there's definite correlations that they say that they have between the rise in anxiety and stress in our culture and also in sleep issues relative to glyphosate toxicity. There's other pieces of this, also other mood and mental disorders, as you can see in Alzheimer's, et cetera. Because what it ultimately does is it messes with your electrical system in your body. There's a lot of people who live in Iowa or working in the farms, and they're just around it because of the blow in the water, and they get lots of neuropathy, shaking diseases. They call it shakers. It's not necessarily Parkinson's, hasn't been diagnosed that, but they shake. So we are all experiencing glyphosate exposure. That's really important to remember. You cannot get away from it. In 2014 and 15, they did a study, so many years ago, and they determined that 80% of Americans had glyphosate in their urine. In 2019, it was 90%. So at this point, we all have glyphosate in our system. We're all dealing with some level of exposure. And it's showing up in all the waters, the streams and rivers as well because of all of the runoff. So now we get to the good part, which is not just all the fear, but what can we actually do about it? And that's the most important thing. There are kind of three different areas that I recommend. First is looking for non-GMO products. And although we're going to get into actually some more about that, because it's not fail-safe in any way, shape, or form, but it's a good place to start. You can also do some testing of your water and your food to find out. You could also get your body tested to determine what kind of level of toxicity or exposure you have experienced. But the best one is that you can use plant-based minerals to remediate it. We're going to talk about some of the studies and things that have shown humic substances as being an incredible support to, did my thing fall? No, I'm sorry. I felt like I thought maybe this thing had fallen off. Anyways, that the humic and fulvic substances can really support remediation out of the body. So let's first talk about non-GMO. Have you all seen that on food when you go? It says non-GMO. The problem is that, do you know anybody can put non-GMO on their label? And there is no governing body. There is nobody who's going out they don't have the manpower. I actually have met the people who are running the non-GMO project. And one of the problems that they have is people just download their label and put it on their little graphic on the internet and put it on their products, okay? Or they just say non-GMO. So you can't really go off of that. It's a good place to start, and if you have a trusted brand, I would call them. I would go look at their website, find out what are they actually doing to maintain their non-GMO status. Okay. It's really good to do the research. The next piece you can do is that you can do your own testing. So there's Great Plains Laboratory. You can actually send your own urine or maybe blood, I'm not quite sure actually, to the Great Plains. It takes several months, but you can find out because they're really backed up with tests. So many people, because this test came out, actually it was at KetoCon last year when the study came out, that 2014-15 study came out. Excuse me? 3 weeks, okay, good, because at the time, or over the last many months, they were really backed up. So did you have it done?
Great Plains?
Yes.
I have it done for my clients. Great Plains takes 3 weeks, and it's urine.
And it's urine. Fantastic. Thank you very much. The other thing you can do is with Gold Standard, it says in your office because I did that with some practitioners. So practitioners have availability of using this Gold Standard diagnostics test in their office. So some practitioners have that capacity. You can also buy a test kit on Amazon. It's called this Greenpeace Instant Test. And it's actually for food and water. So you can buy this test. It's not I can't remember how expensive it is. And you can actually test the water from your tap, find out how it is. You could test your water after you did your reverse osmosis, or you could test it after you did the Brita and find out how it's doing. You can also, you kind of blend up, like you take some food that you're going to eat, you blend it up, and then you do this test, and you can find out, is your food having glyphosate in it? You can also, if you do a backyard garden, it's really a great idea to test the soil because lots of people have sprayed glyphosate. Your neighbor, might be spraying glyphosate and it blows over or the water comes over and it ends up in your garden, even if you've not sprayed it. A friend of mine, she has bees and her neighbor sprayed glyphosate on his blackberries, and the next week her bees started dying in droves. Now, there was a fix for that, which is really cool to know, but we don't have to go into that. So she saved her bees, is the good news. So now let's talk about how plant-based minerals inhibit glyphosate, the effects of glyphosate while it's in your system, how it provides intercellular glyphosate removal. So when you take glyphosate, when you eat glyphosate, it actually gets into your tissues. It's stored in your fats or in your liver, how you can actually get it out of your body. And also just the enhancement of full system detoxification so that it's not only getting out of your cells, but out of your bloodstream altogether. And then beautifully, how these same plant-based substances replenish the minerals that have been depleted through the glyphosate chelation. So what are plant-based minerals? This is a really fun video. I like it. It's plant-based minerals in the making. So imagine a forest, and on the bottom of the forest are all the leaves and all of the detritus that's fallen down. And slowly over time, all these organisms and bugs and all sorts of protozoa, they decompose that material all the way back to its mineral substance. So imagine an entire rainforest back when the dinosaurs lived, and it's decomposed over millennia into this incredibly mineral-rich substance. It's about 10 to 12 feet below the earth, so it's not had any exposure to modern pollutants or glyphosate blowover. And that material is incredibly, beautifully evolved to work with your cellular systems in your body to replenish minerals. Inside of this material that's called humate, this crystalline substance, are two particular molecules that have amazing capacities. One is called humic, and the other is called fulvic. They are actually these colors. So the humic is really, really dark, and the fulvic is this golden color. So let's first talk about fulvic. What fulvic is, it's a very, very small molecule. It's much smaller than a cell, and it carries with it 70 plus minerals. And these minerals it's a very, very strong electrolyte, and it's a powerful flavonoid. And a flavonoid is an intercellular transporter. What it does is it carries nutrients, minerals into the cell, and then it does something that no other molecule on Earth can do. It changes its polarity. And they're actually studying this molecule all around the world because they're like, how in the world does that happen? And they're finding when they look at it that they end up studying quantum physics, quantum mechanics, they get into Higgs boson and things like that. It's really, really incredible. So the beauty of it changing its polarity is all those minerals fall off and nutrients fall off inside your cell for utilization by your mitochondria for energy generation. Now, what most people don't know is that minerals in your body are all well and good, but unless they get inside your cell, most minerals will not do their job of supporting, being cofactors for energy generation in your mitochondria. So this is a very, very important piece. It's also an intercellular chelator. So now it's changed its polarity. The minerals have dropped off inside it. And now what binds to it? Heavy metals, bio-waste and toxins, that just the natural detritus of your cellular operations, and also things like glyphosate that have, because of it being glycine, it's absorbed all the way through and assimilated into your cell, and now you need to get that glyphosate out, and it clings to the fulvic molecule, and the molecule carries it out of the cell. Now, this is a very complex process that we could go into the detail of in terms of how that diffusion process works. We won't go into that, but if anybody wants to geek out, again, I'd love to talk to you. So it's very, very important for intercellular transportation, providing nutrient uptake, mineral replenishment to your body, as well as intercellular detoxification. If any of you have ever done detox, you know that it's one thing to get toxins out of your bloodstream. It's another thing to get toxins out of your cells, out of the inside of your cells. The next molecule that we're going to talk about is the humic molecule. So the humic molecule is a very different animal. It's a very large molecule relative to the cell. It hangs out in the bloodstream, and the way I like to imagine it is like a Velcro ball. So it's very sticky on the outside because it's a super strong electrolyte, one of the strongest electrolytes known to man. And it has a huge amount of surface area. And it binds with free radicals, so it's exponentially the best antioxidant that you can have in your system, thousands of times more effective than any superfood or superfood mix that you could put in your body. It also chelates with heavy metals. It's a very, very effective heavy metal chelator. And then the other thing it does is it does this thing called adsorb. So, which means keeps from absorbing. So when you have these glyphosate molecules in your system, what it does is actually creates a film around around the glyphosate molecule. It binds to it, and then it starts breaking it down. And there are scientific studies, we're going to look a little bit at a few of them. It's absolutely incredible at remediating the effects of the glyphosate while it's in your system. Then ultimately, this humic molecule gets so heavy at a molecular weight because it's carrying these heavy metals, these glyphosate, these bio-waste, toxins, free radicals. It falls out of solution and it leaves your body through the normal elimination channels that you have, whether it's sweat or breathing or just your bowel, et cetera, okay? It's incredibly effective. In fact, humic is so well known as a glyphosate remediator that some people in production agriculture consider it a problem, because when their soil has too much humic in it, it adsorbs the glyphosate, and then the glyphosate doesn't kill the weeds as effectively. So it's extremely well known. The other thing to know about humic is it's so effective for the removal of heavy metals that, as an example, I have had conversations with a Russian scientist. He's one of the most world-renowned scientists studying humic. And he was tasked by the government in Russia to see if he could, as part of many other scientists, get a portion of land near Chernobyl to grow. And his portion was the only portion that grew, and he put humic on that area. So it's incredibly effective. They actually use it in toxic waste dumps, all sorts of areas where they have toxicity. So the beautiful thing is that these two together provide this adsorbing of the glyphosate, the chelation and removal of it from your body, and the breakdown of it. So one of the issues with the systemic glyphosate issue that we have is they use the genetically modified foods, they spray the glyphosate on the food, you eat the food, the glyphosate is in you, now you eliminate it out, and now it's also going down your toilet. So if you also remediate the glyphosate while it's in your system, and you know that breaking down process, when you're peeing it out, you're actually peeing out glyphosate that is no longer effective. So it's actually good for the environment for you to be remediating it inside of you. This is a really interesting conversation I've had with Stephanie Seneff, who is that scientist, about this particular issue. So how do we know that this actually works? So let's look at a few studies. I think it's pretty exciting, and I was blown away when I saw this. So first, there's a study, this woman I think was done in China, and they showed that this is where they showed that humic nullifies the antimicrobial effects. So when I talked about how when you get glyphosate in your gut and it kills all the microflora, the gut microflora, that's what it ultimately does, is the humic totally nullifies those effects. There was a chicken study. The problem with a lot of the agribiz is they're feeding animals feed that is completely ridden with glyphosate. So now when you eat some chicken, you're eating it's actually in the tissue of the chicken. Not only are the animals themselves not healthy, but the food you're eating has a glyphosate in it. So they showed after using, they took a control group and they fed one of the group just the feed the regular way, and the other group, they fed them the same feed with the glyphosate, and they showed these kinds of reductions. 56% in their GI tract reduction, 63% in their kidneys, and 28% reduction in the liver. So these are really big differences. And then finally, this is a really interesting study because it has a lot of things to think about, specifically related to, I don't know if you know that pigs and humans are actually quite close. And one of the things about pigs is that when they fed them the humic, they had a lot less aggression. They had a lot less, their overall health and kind of mellowness. Because pigs, when they raise them in these agribiz settings, they get really aggressive and they start biting and fighting with each other. And they were amazed at the difference in the way these pigs were just living their life. And they also had higher weight. They were able to gain better weight because their guts were healthier and they were able to metabolize and bring in minerals, et cetera. So, the bottom line is GMO, it's not the real problem. The real problem is this GMO glyphosate connection. And you cannot get away from glyphosate exposure. So you really need to think about how you're going to remediate it and get it out of your body. We know that the glyphosate exposure and toxicity is also systemic. So I just really want you to think about it. And finally, using the humic and fulvic to remediate it. Also, you can get tested. Go to your natural health practitioner, see if they can get you tested if you want to, get the full Great Plains test. You can also get the test on the internet, on Amazon, so that you could actually test your own food and water. Are there any questions? Yeah. No, there isn't. So humic and fulvic, these particular plant-based minerals, how they're made is it's a plant decomposition process. It's actually some very specific microbes that go through a very specific process, and it results in this humic and fulvic substance. You've also heard of shilajit or shilajit. That's also a humic fulvic substance. Yeah. Well, let's say it really depends. Every person's body is different. So whenever we're dealing with detox, we have to, kind of back up and really talk to each person, and you have to learn for yourself. Because if you have autoimmune, or if you've had Lyme's disease, or if you've had mycotoxin or mold exposure and have mycotoxin, your system tends to be more sensitive to detoxification. So I have many people who just take the humic and they drink it and they have no problem. And I have some people who take like a quarter teaspoon and they're like, whoa, there's a whole host of what are called Herxheimer symptoms. And if anybody's interested in that, I have a great article in our blog section of our website. I'd be glad to send you to that. So you can learn about Herx. It's not a bad thing. Herxheimer is not a bad thing. It's just your body literally going, yay, I can get rid of all this stuff and I'm going to do it all now. And then you have these different symptoms, okay? So all you have to do is slow it down. So if you're highly toxic, maybe you grew up in Iowa, or maybe you've had, who knows, maybe you work in a hospital where they're doing MRIs all the time or something, you have high toxicity, you could have some Herxheimer from the humic. And there are simple ways to deal with that. It's just a slow introduction method. It's really easy. With aluminum, it does. Okay, so that's a really great question. Thank you for asking it. One of the things that glyphosate does is it increases the bioavailability of aluminum. And a lot of us, I don't know if you guys drink any like seltzer water in those aluminum cans, or now they're selling water in aluminum cans, and they say it's no problem because the aluminum can is lined. No. That aluminum can lining has all sorts of faults in it. So it's going to be a problem because now they're trying to get out of plastic. Thank you, I agree, that's bad. But the problem is aluminum is not the answer. And one of the things that you don't know about aluminum is that it gathers in your pineal gland. And as I said earlier, your pineal gland is where serotonin is synthesized. It's where melatonin is produced. So it really has many negative effects. Yeah. And absolutely, the humic will remove aluminum from your system. Mercury, all heavy metals. Yes. Yeah, so people have asked me, should I take humic because it's a chelator? Should I take humic if I have mercury fillings? And I say absolutely yes, because do you know that mercury filling is having its effects in your body anyway, so better to get it out. Yeah. Probably not shilajit, because again, these are humic substances that were created millennia ago, and they're just found. So, but absolutely any mineral supplement that you take, particularly mineral supplements, you should be going back to the company. You should ask them where it's sourced from, how they produce it, what kind of water they use. Are they using reverse osmosis water? Really find out, especially because these things are concentrated. It's a really good question. Yeah. I think he's telling me that we're done and we're ready to go. I really appreciate you guys coming and bringing great questions. Thank you. Thank you.